Welcome back to another Wednesday Club Bible Dictionary. There's only ever been one person who was never guilty, and that was Jesus. Yet even he went before a judge, a man called Pilate. This is what the Bible says happened. For a third time, Pilate told them, "I found no reason to punish him. I'll have him flogged, beaten, and then I'll release him." But the crowd outside shouted louder and louder, demanding that Jesus be crucified, and they won the day. So Pilate sentenced Jesus to die, as they demanded. Now this is a very, very terrible story, because Pilate, in our story, was a judge. And he did a very unfair and wrong thing. A judge, like Pilate, has two jobs to do. First, he needs to decide if the person in trouble is guilty or not guilty, bad or good. And then if they are bad and guilty, the judge has to decide how they should be punished and give them the right punishment. So Pilate had to decide, is Jesus innocent or guilty? And he knew that Jesus was innocent, not guilty. But he still gave him the punishment as if Jesus was guilty. Even though 3 times he said he's not guilty, he gave him the punishment. He was bullied by the people, he listened to them, and that was a terribly, terribly wrong thing to do. It was very, very unfair. Pilate was the judge. Now we have a judge. Our judge is God. He's the judge of everybody, including us, because he made us. But God will never do what Pilate did. God will never make someone who is not guilty be punished, and he will never let off someone who is guilty. The Bible says, "The Lord is slow to anger, abounding in love, and forgiving sin and rebellion. Yet he does not leave the guilty unpunished." So we need to think about this really serious subject, the subject of judgment, the job that the judge does. Because one day, God will judge us, all of us. We once learnt the memory verse which said, people have to die, after that God will judge them. We're going to think about that. Now Jesus wanted the people he met to know about judgment, to understand it. So he told them a story. He said this, "The kingdom of heaven is like this. Once there was a farmer who planted good seed in his field. But when he was away at night, an enemy came and planted weeds among the good seed and then slipped away. When the good plants began to grow, there was weeds there too. The farmer's workers went to the farmer and said, 'Look, so you planted all good seed. Where have these weeds come from?' And the farmer said, 'Well, an enemy's done this.' And the workers said, 'Well, shall we go weeding? Shall we go pull up the weeds?' The farmer said, 'No, don't do that, in case when you pull up the weeds, you harm the good plants that are growing. You leave it, and then when it comes to harvest time, I will tell the workers to sort those plants into 2 piles. The good seed that's grown in my field, well, that can be bundled up and it will go into my barn, safe. But the weeds that have grown in my field, they'll be thrown into the fire.' Now that sounds a little like a story about farming and about plants, doesn't it? But Jesus' friends knew that the story had a hidden meaning, but just didn't know quite what it was. So they said to Jesus, Jesus, tell us about this story. Explain it to us, the story of the weeds. What does it mean? And this is what Jesus told them. He said, I told you in my story about a field, things growing in a field. Well, the field is like the whole world. And all the plants growing it are the people. There's good plants. They're the people who are real Christians, who've believed in me and I've forgiven them. And the weeds, well, that's everyone else. And in the story I spoke about harvest coming when the plants were picked. Well, that's to show you there's a day coming when God will be judge and everything will finish. And on that day I said the weeds were going to be sorted out from the good plants, and all the people will be divided into two groups on that day, like the weeds and the good plants were. The Christians, the people who've believed in me, are going to go safely straight to heaven. But I'm going to send my angels, and they will remove from this field everything bad, everything that does evil, everyone who does evil, just like the weeds. Now that's supposed to be a warning to us. Jesus said it as a warning. It's true. There's going to be a day, a judgment day, and everyone will either be like the good plants going to heaven, or like the weeds, people who are still guilty. They'll be sent away from God forever, away from anything good. Jesus told us to warn us. This is going to happen. Now you know, now in our real lives, weeds can't change. If you go into the garden and you see a weed growing, there's nothing you can do to change it into a plant that's good. You just have to pull it up. But with God, weeds can change. Guilty people can be made not guilty. Lists of sins can be wiped away. God never lets the guilty off. Remember, he said, yet he does not leave the guilty unpunished. But for me, I was guilty. The punishment for my guiltiness went on to Jesus. He died for me and took my punishment. So now I can be not guilty. It was punished all right, but Jesus took it. Now Jesus finished this story and he said, anyone with ears to hear should listen and understand. What did he mean? Anyone with ears? Who's got ears? We all have ears. We're all supposed to listen and understand. It's like Jesus was saying, listen, get it. Don't go on sinning like you are now, feeling guilty, heading towards that terrible day. Right now, be changed, be forgiven, become not guilty. Boys and girls, hear what Jesus said, listen and understand. A day's coming when everyone will be in one of two groups. Which one are you in? If you ask Jesus now with all your heart to help you, he will forgive you. And then you will be not guilty. You'll be ready for that day. You'll be one of God's good plants who will go to heaven. So, our word for today in our dictionary is the word judgment. Judgment is what a judge does. It's his job. So he decides if someone is guilty or not guilty. And then if they are guilty, he has to give them the right punishment. And God is all of our judges. So that should help you fill in the first bit of your sheet.